Gary Sinise Foundation was established over 10 years ago under the philanthropic direction of award-winning actor and humanitarian Gary Sinise, who is a staunch supporter of veterans, first responders, defenders. And with me is Gary Sinise. Welcome, and great to hear about this and talk about this foundation. So it's such a great cause. And I guess just give me a little history. So I know September 11th had a lot to do with kind of your launching of this. So take me back and tell me how this all came about.
Well, thanks for having me today to talk about it. I've got a long history with veterans, going back a long way, pre Forrest Gump, and back into the '80s and all of that. So many seeds were planted along the way. First, with the veterans in my own family, many veterans on both my side and my wife's side of the family, and then. I got involved with Vietnam veterans groups back in the 80s in Chicago. I grew up in Chicago, Illinois. I started a theater company there with my pals called Steppenwolf. And then we, back in the early 80s, after meeting my wife and engaging in conversations with her Vietnam veteran brothers, and her sister was in the Army. She was married to a Vietnam veteran who was in the Army. I just got to feel a lot of compassion and for what our Vietnam veterans went through. So I started working with different Vietnam veterans groups in Chicago. At my theater company, I directed some theater material that kind of created a whole veterans night. It was material written by Vietnam veterans. We invited Vietnam veterans locally to come and be a part of it. So that kind of established a real strong connection there. And then 10 years later, I played a Vietnam veteran in Forrest Gump, and he was a wounded veteran. So that started me working with our wounded back in the 90s through the Disabled American Veterans. And then it seems like all those seeds just were planted, and it took hold in, a much more significant action-filled way after the terrible attack on our country on September 11, 2001. And then we started deploying to Afghanistan and Iraq. People started getting hurt and people started getting killed. And I just said, I got to get in this game here. So I got to support these folks. I wanted to make sure that our Iraq and Afghanistan veterans got the support that our Vietnam veterans didn't get when they came home from war and when they were dealing with being off in the jungles of Southeast Asia. So I just started going to Iraq and Afghanistan and was volunteering for the USO and military charities and playing concerts for the troops and doing all kinds of things. And it all just snowballed into the creation of my own foundation, the Gary Sinise Foundation.
It almost sounds like you were born to do this in a way. So tell me about the foundation then. So I know you've done a lot of things already. Can you give us some of the examples that you've done? You mentioned Iraq, Afghanistan. What are some other projects?
Oh gosh, the foundation. Well, as I said, prior to the creation of the foundation, and now we're coming up this summer on the end of our 11th year. So this past June 2011. June 2021, we reached our 10-year point. And but prior to that, as I said, I was volunteering all over the place to try to help wherever I could. And that one of the ways I did that was by engaging with many military focused, veterans focused, first responder focused nonprofits. What were they doing? How were they helping? Who were they helping? And was there a way that I could help them help more people? So I volunteered for maybe 25 or 30 different organizations. And I just felt at a certain point, hey, I'm in this game. I'm going to start my own foundation. And having been involved with all these other organizations, seeing what they did, they were working with our wounded. They were obviously like the USO, entertaining troops at home and abroad. They were dealing with the hospitals. They were working with Gold Star children who had lost a parent. So a lot of different initiatives there that I was supporting prior to the creation of the Gary Sinise Foundation, building homes for very badly wounded service members who have very specific physical challenges that, just a regular house might not not work for them. So we just started doing all kinds of things. And when I created the foundation, I wanted to continue to do all those things. So that's why the mission of the Gary Sinise Foundation is so broad. There's a lot of things going on that we're doing all over the place in many different spaces. And that's because that's what I was doing before I started the foundation.
Yeah, well, I'm going to take a look at that. And I assume you have a website too, where people could go find out more, make a donation if they so wish to do so.
Absolutely. GarySiniseFoundation.org.
Okay. You know, and I'm just curious, like being in Hollywood, and how did you stay so grounded and realize that, you know, the sacrifices that people make and average people, how are you able to kind of navigate that whole world and still say as a grounded person?
I just come from my family's a working class background. My grandfather was a World War I veteran. He drove an ambulance on the front lines in France when he was 17 years old, and then came home, married my grandmother, had 3 sons. My dad was the youngest of 3 boys. The 2 oldest went to World War II. My dad was in the Navy during the 50s, the early 50s, during the Korean War. My grandfather worked on the railroad for 40 years. I've got his, in fact, let me show you. This is cool. This is my dad's and my grandfather's. You can kind of see it.
That's great.
It's his railroad watch.
Okay.
He gave me this in 1969. And it says for his grandson, 1969. On my 16th birthday.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, I have these special things that mean a lot. My grandfather he was kind of an intimidating guy because he was one of these Italian guys who was just very gruff and sort of, you know, scary and stuff. And I wished I'd talked to him more about his war years, but I was being a teenager at that time when he was still alive. But I write about him in my book. I have a book called Grateful American. It kind of tells the story of how I got into all the service stuff and going through theater in Chicago and then Hollywood and movies and TV and all that. And all of that really manifested itself into a full-time service life.
Yeah.
That makes it all worth it.
Well, thank you so much, Gary, for coming and telling this story and for doing everything that you do. And I hope you raised a ton of money. I know you've touched a lot of lives. So
it's my absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.